My name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and you're watching Singularity One-on-One. If you guys enjoyed this show, you can help me make it better in two ways. You can write a review on iTunes, or you can simply make a donation. Today, the topic is surveillance, privacy, search engines, and Big Brother. And my esteemed guest is Stephen E. Arnold. Stephen is a specialist in online search and content processing. He is the author of several books and monographs, including a trilogy on Google. Stephen is also the blogger behind Beyond Search. And some time ago, he was working for interesting companies such as Halliburton Nuclear and Booz, Allen, and Hamilton, which, if my memory serves me well, is the same company where Edward Snowden was a contractor for. Was that the case, Stephen, by the way? Is that the same company?
Well, thank you for having me. I think Mr. Snowden was a contractor, yeah.
Yeah, he was a contractor, yes, for the same company. Great. So we may be able to touch a little bit more on that later, but let me start by first saying thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thank you again for inviting me.
My pleasure. So, Stephen, if I were to ask you to introduce yourself in a couple of words, how would you best do that yourself?
I suppose lucky. I got involved with processing information in 1962 by accident, and I was studying medieval religious literature, and I ended up getting hired by Halliburton Nuclear in Washington, D.C. I don't think they were intrigued with the poetry. They were interested in what I could do with the computer.
Wow, that's a very big jump from one field into another. So perhaps that's a very interesting story for you to share with us. So let's start first by perhaps covering your personal history on how you got interested in technology in general and computers in particular, and then eventually how you made the move into the search space, because that's a fascinating story.
Well, I was a 17-year-old freshman at a small college, and I needed money. A professor had posted a request for someone who could program a computer to index content for him. I knew nothing about computers, and so I tore off the phone number and called, and I said, "Sir, I can do the job for you." And he said, "Great." And I went to the library the first semester, and a few weeks later, I was able to show him how I could take his text and print out an index. And everything took off from there. The problem was the little college I went to only had enough computer capacity for people who were studying to be electrical engineers. And when we told them that I was in the English department, they said, "You have to work in the computer center." So I became a late night worker, and that became my love and eventually my career.
Wow. So did that love actually supersede the love for medieval poetry and stuff like that?
To tell you the truth, I just checked something off as a 17-year-old freshman. I had no idea what I was doing. And, it stuck with me because as I moved through college, the English and liberal arts departments wanted somebody who could bring the computer into the study of plays and poetry. Now, I nearly really didn't read anything. I just worked on the computer side of it, and it worked very well. And I was in graduate school working on a PhD at the University of Illinois, and Halliburton needed someone to process the documents related to nuclear technology. And they didn't have anybody, and there was no one in the United States who was even remotely interested in that. And that's how I ended up getting recruited right out of the PhD program. And my career, that set me on my path.
Fascinating. And what year was that? You said 1962?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm 71 years old, and I officially retired after a heart attack in 2013. But I'm keeping busy, and talking to young people like you is a great thrill.
Thank you. And people like me enjoy learning the history and getting some wisdom from people like you too. So I appreciate that very much. Now, let me ask you this though. What was your PhD about? Was that more relatable to that kind of work or not?
Yeah, I was studying at U of I with Arthur Barker, and he wanted me to index Milton. And so I was in the computer center and processing Paradise Lost and Paradise Found. And I gave a speech talking about those techniques. And there was a representative of Halliburton, I guess in Texas, that had ended up at the conference. And it literally was a matter of days between my talk and their making me an offer, which for obviously a PhD student was very attractive. Namely, I could buy food.
Wow. That's fascinating. So let's trace your story a little bit further down the road until eventually you got to a point. So tell us what happened after Halliburton and how your career progressed, so that we get the sort of the bird's eye view of your path.
Well, quickly, at Halliburton, everything worked very well. I ended up doing a project that led me to work with Admiral Craig Hosmer, who was the head of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. I was the U.S. representative for a joint nuclear meeting. Booz Allen apparently heard about that, and I received a call from a gentleman named Ron Coughlin, and he introduced me to the smartest man I ever worked with, Dr. Bill Summers, and he offered me a job to be his right hand in building what is today the Booz Allen government practice. So I was behind the scenes with Dr. Summers through those initial formative years of putting into place the group that had the misfortune to hire a contractor vetted by a third party. But I was there at the inception. I ended up getting hired by a company, a client actually, and that led me to work for the Courier-Journal and Louisville Times, a gentleman named Barry Bingham, who owned a very influential newspaper and conglomerate. And he was losing several $1 million a year with a database. And somehow he made the connection that I could use my knowledge of indexing to solve the problem of that losing money. And we were able to do that very quickly. And I worked in the commercial database business. And we produced, at that time, the #1 business database called ABI Inform. We did the first full text database with corrections, which was nothing more than what I had been doing since I was 17 years old. And those became hugely successful. The Courier-Journal sold, and I went for a short time with the company acquiring, but I ended up working with the Bill Ziff Group in New York City. And we built a number of databases, which were, again, very, very successful, including the very first interactive health information center for consumers. So if you go to the doctor, you could go to this system in 1987, I think, 88.
Wow.
And you could ask a question, and it would give you a plain English response. Now, we didn't use really smart software. We used somewhat stupid software, but we analyzed the kinds of questions people asked when they found they had prostate cancer or something. And so we cheated. We delivered pre-packaged, essentially an intelligence report for a consumer. Bill Ziff decided to sell the company, and I was very fortunate to get a deal with him that I would be kind of available, but I was free to go do new things. And I hooked up with a friend of mine, Chris Kitsey, who lives in the Bay Area now, and we did Point. And in that time, it was 92 or 93 we started, and it was an index of non-pornographic websites. And we did this with both some smart software, again, from 1962, 63. I don't do many original things. I just repeat. And that was very successful. We sold it to CMGI, and I came back to Kentucky. Chris stayed in California, and he got involved with wine.com and some other very successful ventures. And I basically started work on some projects that interested me. And one of those projects involved an investment bank, and I ended up in the year 2000 being invited to assist with indexing the content of the U.S. federal government. At that time, there were 38,000 servers, wow. And I had met Eric Brewer along the way, and he and I were talking about how to index this stuff. And so the original index of the federal government was based on some technology that Dr. Brewer had, and then I worked inside that system. I was in the working in the government, technically in a unit of the White House, but it was on top of a McDonald's where Bill Clinton used to buy hamburgers. But I was around in 911, and another acquaintance of mine involved me in expanding aggressively what was called the Threat Open Source Intelligence Gateway, TOSIG. And that system is running today. I stepped out of that in 2007 when I had my first heart problem. And so since 2007, I've simply been doing projects for different people. I've done some things involving security agencies in the European Union. Until my last health problem, I was doing training for of intelligence and law enforcement. But I've had to drop out of that because, again, the travel is extremely difficult for me. Mm-hmm. And so now, I continue to write my books. My most recent one is called Dark Web Notebook. And this is a cookbook for an investigator to access information on the dark web. But the most unique thing in the book is I'm profiling for the first time some of the companies that perform high-value dark web indexing. And these are off the radar. And this is a follow-on to my book in 2015 called CyberOSINT, Next Generation Information Access. So I've always been the way I was with that first professor as a freshman. I'm behind the scenes. I'm doing things. I've been in the spotlight a little bit, but I am more comfortable working as I do in my computer center here in rural Kentucky. I'm pretty much the same as the 17-year-old I was when I said, yeah, sure, I can do it. I've always felt I can figure out how to do stuff, and that's just been my characteristic. So I am the most youthful 71-year-old you're going to talk to today.
Okay, well, that's very nice. That's excellent, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. So, can you, by any chance, share some of your customers after 2007? And if not by name, at least kind of describe what you do or whatever you can tell us.
Well, I've worked for the world's largest search engine, which I cannot name. I've worked for the world's largest vendor of software, primarily the research group. Of course, the work for the federal government involves a number of agencies, ranging from the White House projects to Capitol Police, to other entities, which I'm not comfortable naming. I'm not active anymore. I don't do any operational work. But yeah, there are organizations that are in the news. In Europe, I have worked for groups that are seeking to stop crime from certain Eastern European states, and I've worked for one of the intelligence agencies, which is the primary contractor for the U.S. government. The U.S. government outsources some intelligence activities, and I work with that group. Mm-hmm. And plus some commercial outfits like investment banks. I worked with Bear Stearns, which supported my Google work for years until it failed. A SunTrust, a Manning and Napier, which has been a very large investor in next generation content systems. Mm-hmm. So I've been around. I used to do columns and things, but I'm more happy doing my research here and then responding. If someone I know has a problem and it makes sense, I will try to tackle it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So yeah, in fact, of course, you have half a century worth of experience in the field, which is what makes you so unique, and which is why I'm so happy to have this discussion with you today. So let's start diving into the details step by step, while keeping in mind that I would like to keep a sort of a broader perspective than what you usually used to, perhaps, because I want to keep the big picture in mind, and also because most of my audience, including myself, we're not experts in the field as you are. So there's only so deep we can go, and of course, you can only share so much on some of those topics. But let's start with this, perhaps. Tell us what your blog Beyond Search is all about.
Well, I started Beyond Search in 2008 because I was extremely angry about the information regarding the success and health of fast search and transfer. At that time, fast search and transfer, it came to my attention, was under investigation by the Norwegian financial authorities for misstating its financials. And I had done research that identified that there was substance behind that investigation. And so I turned the blog into the only independent source of information about what I think are problems or misstatements related to online search and content processing. I don't do advertising. I pay 4 researchers, 1 journalist, 2 research librarians, and 1 just very hardworking single mother to process the data and create the short items. Mm-hmm. And then I typically will, if they do 2 stories on a similar topic, I put them together and add my critical twist. Mm-hmm. And so as the enterprise search sector has been shown to have a glass ceiling in terms of revenues, I continue to cover that sector because search, finding information, is the core of the intelligence process. If you can't find it, you can't do anything. And so it's absolutely essential to understand answering questions on point and in a manner that someone can use it to do a job. And that's been the theme of Beyond Search.
Now, so let me ask you, the way you define search, that would make it totally applicable or kind of the same thing, regardless of whether it's used for law enforcement analysis or counterterrorism effort post 9/11 or what have you, and or for commercial purposes like Google does, for example, right? It's the same thing. It's just a different target audience and so on, isn't it?
Exactly the same as what the professor wanted to do in 1962. He had a bunch of Latin sermons, and the only way you could find anything was to look at the sermons on microfilm. This is the same thing we have, whether it's cell phone intercepts, whether it's geospatial data, whether it's processing YouTube's uploaded from a specific IP address. Exactly the same problem and process. The difficulty that exists is that today we need to process data in a range of file types and at much higher speeds than have ever been anticipated. But the processes remain the same. If we talk about Google showing you where to get a pizza in San Mateo, or whether we talk about the location of a bad actor in downtown Chicago on Michigan Avenue, it's exactly the same set of algorithmic procedures and thought processes.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So before we dive in here, let me just ask you about your books and how they fit within this here and your reports. So, for example, tell us a little bit more about the Google Trilogy, and perhaps why I think it's the second book, which is named Google, the Calculating Predator. So please unpack that for us a little bit.
Well, I was working here in Kentucky, and I had done a couple of speeches about Google and the methods of obtaining relevance for the search results. And I had gone back and gotten a copy of Sergey Brin's and Larry Page's syllabus for a computer science class they taught when they were students at Stanford. And the paper, yes. I just got the syllabus and I looked at it, and Sergey and Larry identified the centroids of interest for that course. So I read everything. And when I read it, and then I looked at the write-up that came out about first the search engine paper that Sergey and Larry did, and then the patent application, which is assigned to Stanford Board of Trustees, not Google, I was able to identify the precursors. So I thought, nobody knows this. Everybody thinks Google just came out of the dorm room and Backrub and those crazy Lego-colored servers they had, which they actually took from other parts of the computer science class, according to my research. So that led me to write the first book, which was called The Google Legacy, because the angle of the legacy was that what these young men did was going to be the trajectory for the companies that we now recognize as Facebook, Airbnb, eBay, Palantir, etc. Very smart young people whose theory is, let's look at what's available but not been used effectively, right? Nothing really new, but like Lego blocks, we put it together and we have something quite remarkable. And I wrote that down, and that was called The Google Legacy, and that was quite successful. And then Bear Stearns reproduced part of the book. One of my contacts, a former CIA person, purchased a bulk volumes, a bulk quantity, and they used it in some training at the Central Intelligence Agency. And then a fella at Bear Stearns asked me, what's next? I wrangled a little bit of money from him, and that's when I did the Calculating Predator. And the idea is that Google was, of all of the search engines that were available for web processing, Google was most wedded to the use of pure mathematical methods in order to reduce costs. And so I focused on their patent applications and journal literature. And that book, The Calculating Predator, really lays out the mathematical basis behind most of the infrastructure that is delivering services today. And I think I started work on that book in 2008, and it appeared in 2009. And then another bank asked me to look at the impact of Google on the world of free information and publishing. And that led me to Google the Digital Gutenberg, because at that time, Google was one of the largest net generators of digital information, although people don't think of them as that. But if you view the ads as content, and the book project as content, and the blog posts as content, and the actual search results as content, Google at that time was larger content generator than Facebook. Today, Facebook is a bigger publisher. And so that was the Google Trilogy. And I just got tired of Google, and I started working on what is beyond Google, and that led me to CyberOSINT. And so the CyberOSINT book is a follow-on in the sense, if we've hit a dead end with keyword search, what's next? And that book, CyberOSINT, is the first look at how collections of functions can deliver comprehensive, actionable reports, either to an operator, a military or police or intelligence operator, or to a unit in a warfighting zone where they have to process information, get an output on a mobile device, and then either take defensive action to save their lives or offensive action to remove a threat. And so those books are all related, and they can be read in sequencing. And the proof of the value of the Google legacy is that every one of those books, just like my entire work in online started in 1962, my work on Google started in 1998 or 99, I don't really do anything new. I just keep following these themes. And so Dark Web Notebook is very logical. It's simply, this is a new content domain. And if you're an intelligence or information professional, how do you make headway in that space? And, at my age, I don't know how long I can keep going. But, that's what's occupying me right now and how the books fit together.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I get the calculating part of the title because of its mathematical basis, as you put it. But I still don't see the predator quite clearly. Can you please tell us a bit more on that?
Oh, yeah. I did an analysis for an intelligence group of the functions and biases in the most used algorithms in content processing. And one of the characteristics of these algorithms is that they are greedy. As soon as an algorithm discerns a signal, and this is explained in a number of Google patents, it's very clear, the signal amplifies itself, right? So if a lot of people are looking for pizza in San Mateo, the system simply recognizes that blip, and that immediately, has impacts within the Google advertising environment, right?
Yeah, right now a lot of people are looking for move to Canada. Every time there's a US...
Exactly. So searches on Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island are going up. If you do, okay, the algorithms then seize on that, and they are greedy, and they feed that in. And these algorithms have a tendency to create feedback loops. And so one of the pieces of research I did for the TOSIX project was, how can we create content that triggers feedback loops in these algorithms? Well, that's where the predator part comes from. If you trigger the algorithm and it continues to be stimulated, they just become greedy. So I use that notion of Google and its patents and disclosures, and I don't remember the patent number now, but it describes what Google calls as mechanics and garbage and all sorts of things. But it really means the system is greedy, it's consuming information. And I just put the words together and I came up with, Google version 2, the calculating predator. Because after they exhausted the initial 5 years of Google development, the next wave up was to integrate more sophisticated algorithmic methods from a guy named Ramanathan Guha and a guy named Elan Halibi, both of whom are still at Google. And I cover them extensively in the Calculating Predator.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, and I have to add another part to that. And it was in 2011 when I went to visit Google, they were buying an average of 2 companies per week. I think this has actually accelerated since then. And if I'm not mistaken, it's about 3 companies per week that Google is buying and acquiring now. So that's kind of also...
Yeah. It all fits together. As the system becomes larger and starts consuming the knowledge, because of the algorithmic thinking that Sergey and Larry do, it makes perfect sense to acquire promising companies because you get the acqui-hire, you get smart people coming in, and you also get modules of technology that you can bring in and add. And so as I explain in both Google Legacy and the Calculating Predator, the additive function of technology tends to have a geometric and in some cases exponential impact on the capabilities of Google. There would be no loon balloon if Google hadn't taken that approach of acquiring technology and expertise.
Right, and that kind of also is revealed by their recent move to Alphabet rather than Google, with a portfolio of investments and acquisitions and stuff like that. So
yeah, if you get the Google Legacy, I got a picture of that. I just didn't include the balloon thing, and I didn't include conquering death. But that diagram I did in 2006 is about 75 or 80% accurate, which is pretty darned amazing since nobody even knew how Google was functioning or what its trajectory was.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty impressive. Good work there. Let me just step away from Google for a second, Stephen, and let me ask you, what are the major players in search today? And are they the ones that the public usually sees in the spotlight, like usually Google and Yahoo and maybe YouTube, as often quoted to be the 3rd largest search engine out there? Or are there other major players that we don't get to see that often?
Well, that's a very good question, but it has to be chopped up like a wiener or something.
One bite at a time.
Okay, if we chop off one end of the wiener, there's a company that is called Elastic, and it is a company which has taken Lucene open source technology and made it the de facto choice for building a search system. And so you have open source, the Lucene and Solr, and then you have a commercial packager, the leader of which right now is Elastic. Now, there are a bunch of other companies who are doing this stuff, but the data that I collect here suggests Elastic is a home run. And the guy, Shai Bannon, had done a previous search engine. This is a great idea he came up with. He's got substantial funding, and the company is very successful. And my son, who continues to work on the government projects after I stepped out, he's taken over some of the search work for the U.S. government. He is one of the strongest supporters of Elastic, very effective. If we chop in the middle, there are people who are providing search technology, many of which you'll know. If I name them, you'll say, oh, wow, I didn't know they were doing it. And these guys are selling stuff. So there's Oracle, there's IBM, there's Hewlett-Packard, and those companies are the choice for many large firms. If you go to an investment bank, they're going to be looking at a stable, established brand. Now, you can quickly say, well, those guys didn't invent search. Hey, nobody invented search. I didn't invent search. I copied it from a book in 1962. So these are the high-profile brands. And then at the far end of the wiener, the right end, there are companies you've never heard of, currently doing extremely advanced work in search and content processing. One of them is Diffio. That company operates out of Boston, funded by MIT, applies many of the mathematical methods from nuclear physics. There's a second company called Tiberium, I believe, and it is located in Baltimore. Again, tremendous work based on the mathematics of nuclear physics to identify patterns in large flows. So what we have today is an extremely rich spectrum of companies. At one end, we have open source, which is the choice if you need a stable, reliable search system. If you're a large bank or in an institution, you'll be looking at the branded systems from the major enterprise providers. And if you're in the area that I'm exploring now and working on, you are tracking the companies, like Hyperion Gray, Diffio, Tiberium, etc. That's Terbium, I'm sorry, Terbium, I mispronounced it. You're looking at those firms. So we have a very exciting time after more than 50 years of search and content processing.
Yeah, and in your books and your monographs, you list and profile dozens upon dozens upon dozens of such very interesting companies. So I was amazed by the spectrum of companies that I've never even heard of before. But let me ask you, what about two examples that come to my mind that do very interesting work? One made a little bit of headline news by being invested in from both Google and the CIA, perhaps, called Recorded Future. And another one, a little bit notorious, perhaps for other reasons, called Palantir. Can you talk to us a bit about those two?
Okay, I've actually taken money from Recorded Future, so be aware. That company is partially funded in a remarkable investment deal by Google and In-Q-Tel. They injected cash as a team into Recorded Future. That company is the leader, in my opinion, in predictive analytics. The system is able to process standard web content as well as directed content acquisition using Recorded Future technology. The reason Google and In-Q-Tel were interested, based on my research, boils down to Google is terrible at time. T-I-M-E. The concept of time in the Google system is very good in advertising time. Will your ad run on this day and when? It's very good in terms of analyzing analytics from the Urchin technology Google bought. Those guys, I think they were in LA. But in terms of doing a process to show me the most important information on this particular date and time and location is not what Google does. So Google gets temporal functionality. In-Q-Tel gets the predictive capabilities and visualization tools that were developed by the team that did Spotfire. And Spotfire is now part of TIBCO, and TIBCO is located in Palo Alto on one of those leafy streets behind those big ugly white towers in Palo Alto Square. So all of these things fit together for Google because this allows them to have a strong presence in the intelligence sector. Further, it's partnering with In-Q-Tel, but also have access to that extremely sophisticated temporal function. So Recorded Future is very important. Recorded Future is part of the Department of Defense mashup working group, along with another 24 companies. and it is positioned as an open, standard, pluggable, componentized, advanced mathematical and visualization system. It is extremely important. If I were younger and I were healthier, I would be beating down the door of Recorded Future, because I see many ways to use that technology in my area of interest, which is intelligence, but also to use it in some allied fields, such as you mentioned, the YouTube content and some other things.
Let me just stop you for 1 second. So if I get this right, and please correct my ignorance anytime it steps out of line, is Recorded Future supposed to be helpful in identifying the possibility or the higher probability of an occurrence of a 9/11 or Paris attack type of event before it were to occur? Is that the goal?
I get that question a lot. Any mathematical system can be interpreted as predictive. So we have to put the marketing aside. What Recorded Future does is to use a suite of mathematical procedures which are taught in every college around the world, right? And they have assembled those in the manner of Google in order to perform some specific refinements of the outputs. Remember, Google came from Dr. John Kleinberg and from the guys at DEC Alpha. And then Google refined that in the Lego block model. Recorded Future is able to shape mathematics to provide signals that an informed analyst can interpret as a precursor of intent. Specifically, there has been an area where there's been an improvised explosive device, and you analyze the cell phone traffic around that area, you examine the blog traffic, you examine the messaging from cell phones, from the various applications that are in use, and you see that the signals coincide within a statistically defined area. Think of it as a fruit basket. In that fruit basket, you have the ingredients that your mom used to use to make cookies. And so now an analyst can look at that signals, which are mathematical outputs or visualizations, and can conclude we need to take additional action in that area. That action can be feet on the street, it can be surveillance, it can be simply doing more mathematical analyses of additional data, like imagery from satellites, whatever, looking for truck movements. Recorded Future is one of the best companies at assembling those signals and displaying them in temporal structures. So if you're working, let's say you're part of a special operations team and there are 6 of you, and you need to know which area to avoid, right? You do not want to go to that place. You can look at the Recorded Future outputs and you can choose a place where there aren't any signals, right? You avoid. So is that predictive? In my book, yeah, sure, that is allowing a human to make an informed decision. Is it the marketing craziness that I read every day and make fun of in Beyond Search? No, that stuff is science fiction. It's nuts. You have to have a mathematical underpinnings to know what's going on. But if you see the output, you can make an informed decision. And that becomes, from my book, useful predictive analytics.
Mm-hmm. And how is that different from the work that Palantir does?
Well, that is a great question. Again, I need to tell you, prior to the sale of I2, Palantir's biggest customer or biggest competitor, I was an advisor to one of the founders of I2 for a number of years. Palantir is a company that has built, using open source technology, Lucene, for example, and others, a platform to perform a multiplicity of intelligence functions behind a consumerized interface. And so in my dark web notebook, I have examples of the Palantir interface, which I could teach you to use in less than a half hour. So that means that you could pull together certain types of intelligence information, display those locations of improvised explosive devices on a map, and determine on a timeline if that was recent activity or old activity. Palantir makes all of that easy. And the difference between Palantir and its competitor, BAE Systems Net Reveal, or IBM i2 in its present form, not the one I worked for, is that those systems tend to not be a half hour to 1 hour training. I would have to sit you down with me in this computer room. You can see some of the screens behind me. And I would have to have you spend a week at least before you could do particularly meaningful work with i2. And the reason is Palantir got funding from In-Q-Tel, and it then worked with In-Q-Tel's contacts to devise a system that addressed the usability problems in the incumbent leaders in platform augmented intelligence. So that's the buzzword, augmented intelligence. Machines help an intelligence officer do work faster and more accurately.
Does that mean it's visualizing all the data in a more intuitive manner? I'm just trying to translate it for us simple civilians here.
Yes. If I were to show you, I don't have a way to connect you to one of the machines where I have the interfaces available. You would say this is like iPad. And you could pull in an entity, let's say John Smith, and you could look at John Smith at his last known location on a map, and then you can click an icon and see who John Smith had phoned in the last hour. And you see that on the map. And obviously, anyone he phoned who is in close geographic proximity to him, you now know that's a person of interest, and you can explore from there.
And you can see them on the map too.
Yeah. And then Palantir is a platform. So if you wanted to integrate more dynamic stuff like the Geophidia technology, which is intercept based, and you have to be in law enforcement to use it, you could look at the message traffic from those people in proximity. So Palantir makes all of this available. And if I show it to you, your first reaction will be, oh my golly, this is easy to use. This is easy to use. And remember, you're like a 22-year-old specialist and you don't know anything about it. You're like me when I was 17. So it's easy to use. And the second thing, it'll output not a laundry list of results, it'll output a visual representation of which a map is one type. You can do other things, right?
Who is this system for? Who are the users? Who has access to Palantir, for example?
Well, there are two types of Palantir product. The type of product I'm familiar with is called Gotham, and that is designed for intelligence, analysts, and police to process data related to suspected bad actors. The other Palantir is called Metropolitan, and Metropolitan is the same mathematical plumbing, the same visualization plumbing in an interface designed for an MBA on Wall Street, so that you can call up a company, Yahoo, and you can analyze the signals in the news stream and see how they relate to Yahoo. There's a link analysis. And then the signals that interest you may be ones you can click on and then look at the underlying data, or you just want to look at a statistical summary of the signals, and you see a lot of activity between Yahoo and Verizon, so you decide to buy stock. And that's the kind of actionable functions that Palantir delivers to people today. And I do have a special report that'll be available in about 4 weeks, which is 100 pages about Palantir. It's the most comprehensive analysis of the company's technology. And I did the same thing I did to Google. I took the patents, I read them, I separated the ones that I thought were important, and I based my technical analysis on 21 patent documents. And that's never before been done. So that document will be interesting to anyone who wants to understand the Palantir platform and its business impacts.
Let me ask you this. Perhaps now is the time to be, since you kind of gave us such a great description about the capabilities of those systems, for example, with respect to cell phones and placing users on the map and addressing their messaging and or phone calls. Let me ask you about the currently ongoing kind of struggle between Apple versus the FBI about sort of creating a backdoor or unlocking that specific cell phone, which of course Apple says would then give the FBI the ability to pretty much break through in any other Apple cell phone. Based on what you're telling me right now, this seems to be already in actuality happening. Is that misunderstanding on my end?
Well, security is a moving target. Each time a vendor brings out a new device with new security, it is not something anybody has a crack for. But once the product is in the market, there are companies, not in the US, I don't want to mention any US companies, who specialize working for nation states to compromise those devices. And some of the companies are not well known, and then if they are known, they change their names. So Vupen in Toulouse, which is a very big tech center in France, changed its name to Zerodium. Vupen is actively seeking young programmers who have methods to compromise Apple and other devices, and they pay money. Then there's a well-known group, the hacking team, which focuses on exploits, but their capabilities range beyond just putting malware on a bad actor's computer via a flash or a PDF file. Mm-hmm. There are companies operating in the Ukraine, which and in Tallinn, Estonia. I don't want to name that group because, again, I have a relationship with them. But one of their principals is in San Francisco at this time. Mm-hmm. And they specialize in providing support to the governments outside the U.S. In addition to the group in Estonia, there are companies operating in Germany, one of which has been in the news as Finfisher, which has been tapped by the some of the authorities to provide advanced capabilities to the German government. My view is I'm not a political animal. I do not make moral judgments about the work I've been asked to do, and I'm not going to change after 50 years. People hire me to do a job. If these jobs regarding the hardware are not done today, there is now sufficient information available from the discussion of the current Apple FBI matter to guide the groups that I just mentioned, plus groups I've not mentioned, like Agleya in India, to perform whatever engineering tasks are required. And they will get contracts from their governments, and they'll have access to the best mathematicians, electrical engineers, and computer scientists. And as you know, if I could figure out indexing Latin when I was 17 years old and didn't know what my major was, what do you think people far smarter than I can do today when they're supported and encouraged and put in a team environment where it is fun and cool? So my answer to your question is, when you brought it up, my view, this is kind of theater. The real work is already done, and the theater is good and it makes a thing communicate, but it's not germane to what is actually going on in the world.
In other words, regardless of the outcome of that struggle between Apple and the FBI, there will be other actors who would be willing to step in and get the job done, if they haven't already done so.
That's a very good way to state it. I am a big proponent of using quantum technology to perform computing and encryption tasks. The problem is the cost and complexity of those methods. If you get to Google, they'll maybe let you look through the window at the D-Wave thing they got sort of running. But that is not practical. So what we have is a reality that is not well understood by most people. And that reality has been in place and under aggressive development for decades.
Very interesting. So let me ask you the other question then that my audience and me have discussed on a couple of other occasions then. Even though you said you're not kind of a political animal, does it in any way, in your professional perhaps or personal opinion, add up to Big Brother? Because of course that's the concern. The concern is we're being surveilled everywhere we go, everything we do, our activity, be it online, on our cell phones, walking anywhere, since we always have a cell phone in our pocket or in our car with us. We're being constantly monitored, and somebody is collecting the data, be it government, be it private enterprises and corporations. So does it all add up to Big Brother, in your view?
If you say Big Brother, that has an emotional connotation.
I mean, any of the visions as espoused by George Orwell, Huxley, or even Kafka in some of their works, right?
I think if we take those three fictional descriptions that occurred before there were computers, you know that in the mind of those very intelligent people, there is an inherent awareness that monitoring and surveillance is part of their view of society. If you flash forward to today, they're correct. Because when you put humans together and you charge them with keeping the peace or stopping speeding or eliminating potential hotspots where your wife and daughter go shopping, they are going to take advantage of the tools that are readily available. And there's no way to stop it. It's not in any single country. It is a function of a hierarchy. If you have a company and you're at the top of the company, you have controls no one else has, and it gives you a unique way to see the world and make decisions. And that is inherent in the human condition. So what we see happening today is that those needs are simply becoming dominant. They're moving up the Maslow hierarchy. So instead of food, you've got surveillance, up there. And that's all over the world, every country I've worked in. And I've been in more than, I think, I don't remember, probably 40 countries. It's exactly the same. It's not cultural. It's essentially a function that was identified by Kafka, Orwell, and the other prescient fiction writers.
Okay, so in a way, you're putting forward the argument that that's kind of inevitable feature of our kind of form of government governance and or social organization, if you will. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but first, let me ask you to step out of your comfort zone a little bit. And so let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that it is inevitable, as you say. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
See, you're asking a person who worked at Halliburton Nuclear, and I don't think that way.
Isn't that an important question?
I know it is, but I've been asked this question: how could you go from working at a university to working in the nuclear industry? And the answer was, I solve problems. I have never had any interest or desire to come down on the side of good or bad. I do what I do. I stay in my little zone. So I'm useless in a policy decision. I would ask you, what do you want to accomplish, and can you pay me? And then I would say, I will do it or I won't. I don't make a judgment about you. That's your decision. So I'm kind of a tool. That's how I've positioned myself. And I'm not wired that way. My wife says to me, Steve, you just don't have a lot of empathy, and that's true. I do not. I just don't relate to the imagery or the words or the plights. I focus on my area of expertise to the exclusion of these other issues. And I don't know, as I've always been that way. That's my wiring. So I'm not good at that.
But if I may push you a little bit here, because that's very comfortable and convenient, place to be in and safe. But if you look at the other big problem solvers, like, for example, Oppenheimer, he solved a major issue, and then eventually he regretted solving that issue, right? And went to spend a lot of time against nuclear arms proliferation and stuff like that. So, in other words, it's not, you see, my blog is people think it's about technology, but it's really about ethics, because technology in itself is amoral, but how we use it, how we apply it, makes it good or bad, makes it moral or immoral. And that, to me, is the most interesting part. So, for example, let me give you a specific example to you. Let's say I'm Al-Qaeda and I come to you to solve my problem, right? Would you do that? Would you solve my problem?
Well, again, I get asked this frequently. In my career, I do not drink, I do not smoke, I do not take drugs, I have never been arrested. If I'm presented with a choice, I typically decide on what I think is a conservative, appropriate type of behavior. So if you call me and you are a representative of a country that is an enemy of the United States, I will not assist you. I don't talk to you. I don't follow up. I don't do anything.
But that's a choice you make.
Exactly. And I behave from my upbringing in the Midwest as an overachieving single child of a married father and mother who were married for over 58 years, a very, I guess, rigid sense of right and wrong. But I do not impose that on other people. I exercise that by my decision, telling you, no, I don't want to speak with you. No, I don't want to work with that.
Right. And
that's how I operate.
I appreciate that, and I just wanted to use that example to point that you do make those choices. They're inevitable, just like what you said about the other thing is inevitable, that's to say surveillance. But I would say moral decisions are also inevitable in one way or another, simply because of the actions we make. They always translate into some kind of ethical direction.
I would agree. But again, you're looking at a person who has been alive 70 years. And, I've absorbed some certain patterns of conduct from my parents, which I don't think about unless you probe me. But
that's what I'm doing right now.
but I do, in my mind, try to make situational decisions that are correct according to my value standard. Let me give you an example. I worked with a fella, and he played the trick on me in January. I terminated relationship with that person. I'd known him for 5 years at that point, but I do not want to work with people whom I cannot trust.
I agree that, and I
That's
appreciate that. Yes,
black and white guy. I know that I have worked for people in the investment banks who I don't trust. But once I finished the job and discovered that, I never went back. Because I don't have prior knowledge of the entire implication of the work.
Right, I understand that, yes.
And so I am very much the 17-year-old I was when I tore off the thing that need a computer programmer to index. That is a falsehood. I lied. I went to the meeting and I told the man, I can do this. And it was.
In a way, you were right, only you didn't know how it would be done at the time.
Exactly. I had confidence because when I was young, I thought I was one of the smartest people in the world. Now I realize I'm not. I'm honored that you want to talk to me, but I'm just a very average person who works hard in one little area, like reading the Palantir patents. Find another 71-year-old who did that. You're not going to. There is zero out there. I'm the only guy. And that's been my key to work. I get a job, I do it, and if it makes me comfortable, I will continue to do it. If it makes me uncomfortable, I finish the work, I go away, I just don't go there again. Mm-hmm. And so I cannot deal with these larger trends in society. I'm not equipped interpersonally, I'm not equipped emotionally, I'm not equipped intellectually. I am good at certain things, and if you hire me, I execute within that skill set.
Yeah.
People said to me at Halliburton, we're going to talk about nuclear effects modeling. Does that bother you? I said, will I get paid in 2 weeks? And they said, yes. I said, I'm on board. I needed a job. And so I did the work in the Halliburton environment. I didn't really think about it. I was 21 years old or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. What do I know?
Let me move on from this a little bit here. By the way, your story of saying that you can do the job without knowing how reminds me very much to when Microsoft first sold an operating system to IBM at a time when they didn't actually have one. And so right after the meeting with IBM in New York or Boston or somewhere in the East Coast, Paul Allen had to take a flight and fly to the West Coast and go to a guy's garage who invented DOS.
All right, Gary. Well, They went first to Gary Kildall and got turned down, and then they found a guy near Gates' house, But again, intelligence, I don't know. I don't know how to explain intelligence. That interests me tremendously because I don't think of myself as being smart. I think of myself as being able to read all 500 Google patents when I started in 2006. I think of myself as being able to read all of the 90-odd Palantir patent documents. I just slog along, and I get my joy by being able to provide for my family and feel satisfaction in my work. And that's been my focus. I don't want to hurt anyone myself.
Yeah, and
I'll tell you, if I'm walking down the street in New York and I'm thinking about something, I would trip over a street person. The guy with the sign and, no arms and, I wouldn't see him. I'm in my own world. Look at where I am. I'm underground, and there are 13 servers in this area. Most people 71 are in a rest home. And here I am writing analyses of the dark web and Palantir. I'm in my own little world. And I've always been that way. So I am not representative, and I would be the first to say I'm not normal, and anyone who knows me would say the same thing. They would say, this guy is not able to shift out of his thought process. I work and focus 100%. And that's just the wiring that I have.
Stephen, time is advancing here, so I'd like to finish our interview, if possible, within the next 17 or 18 minutes the most. So let me try and move on here with a couple of quick ones, which are kind of cotangent on what we discussed. One of them is simply because I can't forego. There were a few people who asked me to ask you about that, and that's you actually even mentioned that Booz Allen had the misfortune of hiring a certain contractor called Edward Snowden. Can you just tell me a little bit more of your view on that?
Yeah, as Booz Allen or any organization gets larger, you depend on third parties to perform the vetting of individuals. And, Edward Snowden came as a contractor who was vetted by a third party. That company is out of business now. That the Edward Snowden affair put him away. In the Booz Allen, when I worked with Dr. Summers, the vetting would have been handled by the fellow who called me, Ron Coughlin. And I am pretty confident Ron would not have hired Mr. Snowden.
Why?
Because of the process. It was a more personal function when I worked at Booz Allen. It was not as big a company. We had smaller government contracts.
But what would have triggered the denial rather than the acceptance? Because to my knowledge, Edward did tick all the right checkboxes.
I just have confidence in Coughlin's people sense. And, it was a more personal company. Think back to the hiring process at Google in that series of years from 1998 to 2006, 2007. That's the miracle period. You got hired at Google if someone knew you and vouched for you, right? You were in a class at Stanford, and that professor told you this kid could do the work, and Google would pay attention to them. If you were unknown to Google, they would not run you through these infinite interviews. They would give you a test called the Google Lab Aptitude Test. I have a copy of one of the first ones. And if you didn't answer the questions, you were washed out. Today, Google hires by buying companies.
Yes.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
Booz Allen is the same way. I'm not criticizing Google or Booz Allen or Hewlett Packard or IBM or any of them. But as you industrialize processes, you get a statistical error. And it's not traced back to any one person. It was a process that produced Snowden. And there you have it. And, my instinct is that Coughlin and his team would have identified behaviors that made them uncomfortable. And,
I agree with you that it was a process that produced Snowden, but some people have said that the process is not the hiring process, but the process of surveillance at large scale dragnet of American citizens, which seems to be both illegal and unconstitutional and unethical and, quite frankly, politically very stupid in some ways, and according to others, actually ineffective in producing the outcomes they're hoping it will produce.
Well, right, because the marketing science fiction is one of the things that accelerates the building of ever larger systems. If you do a search for DCGS-A space mashup, you will see a very huge next generation system being built. And it is one of those things that is almost science fiction. But it is not here. It's simply being assembled because people are capable of doing it. The difference between
and
Snowden...
get paid to do it.
Huh?
And get paid to do so.
Yeah, if I were young again, I would be on board with that, you know? That would be cool to do. I mean, I could see a lot of things where my expertise could contribute. The difference between a profile like Snowden and a profile like mine is that I am very rigid in my sense of what I will and won't do. It's been consistent for 70 years.
Yeah.
His personality was shaped by the work and his thinking about the work. You know, and if you were working on nuclear effects modeling and worrying about how many people you kill from the nuclear plume, and then you went and talked about that work, you would be behaving in a statistically small manner for the people who normally get involved in that work. You learn, like doctors, to compartmentalize it. And I'm good at compartmentalizing.
Yeah, you're talking about two different mindsets, which were well exemplified by two people who worked on the Manhattan Project. One was Oppenheimer, another was John von Neumann. John von Neumann continued in the same vein of work and was instrumental in the production of the hydrogen bomb, and was even pushing the United States to strike first the communists. Whereas Oppenheimer changed his mind after World War II and actually started working as an opposition to the development of the hydrogen bomb. So those are the two mindsets that you and Edward Snowden exhibit.
Exactly. I'm a different person, and that is going to exist. And as an organization gets larger and the implications of the work become more evident, different personalities behave in a different manner. And people like Coughlin were good at understanding what it took to be successful at Booz Allen. When I joined, they told you 6 months, most of you will be fired. And some people quit right away because they didn't feel that they could deal with the challenge. You know, the pressure, the number of hours, the billability, responsibility, the getting smart on a topic area on a weekend when your child was in the hospital, that weeds out the sissies.
Yeah.
Okay? And so that's just what happens in these high impact, high potential companies. You attract and cultivate people who have a specific mindset. Mm-hmm. And the mindset in intelligence and police and analysts on Wall Street is different today in that it's much more quantitative based, focuses on the use of math to identify signals so you can make a decision in a more informed manner. And that is a revolution. And that's why I don't get overly excited about the DCGS-A mashup project. I don't get overly excited about Avatar, another project. I understand where they fit, and they're going to follow the same trajectory other large projects have. Mm-hmm. And that's our situation at the moment.
Okay, so let's move on. Then, what in your view are the big issues in search today that you're most interested in?
Well, the thing that I'm fascinated with is the application of advanced mathematics, principally from the type of statistical procedures used for the identification of significant particles in nuclear collisions, such as CERN. I think that those mathematics can help surface signals in content that would be otherwise missed by even an intelligent analyst. The second mathematical area that interests me are multidimensional manifolds And the idea that a sequence of data can be placed in a three-dimensional space, take a snapshot of that, then do the same process X time slices later, and you have a snapshot, and then you look at a movie of the salient points through those manifold snapshots. And you're going to say, well, what does that have to do with Twitter? Yeah, I'm a map and timeline and visualization. What does that have to do with Twitter? Well, let's say I have a Twitter stream coming in and I am applying a Diffio type of methods, the company at MIT, and I'm using the manifold techniques of a researcher in Sweden. I can't remember his name right now, but I have several of his papers. Then I think we would find signals in the Twitter stream that would be not detectable by today's common procedures, right? If you think about nuclear fusion, you find that the fusion cannot be sustained. And by looking at different types of mathematical analyses through time, you see that the loss of the containment of the fusion is caused by a broader, non-visible, non-detectable deterioration of an external magnetic shell among the particles. So now, those mathematical procedures have revealed to the researchers on fusion that there is a phenomenon that was hitherto not recognized. And if you take a look at the search in fusion and look at the most recent papers, you'll see that there is this notion of layers. These new techniques allow us to take text or cell phone transmission data that's anonymized, or take any other large data sets and apply these next generation mathematical procedures. I think it will reveal things about human behavior that we cannot discern just by reading words or looking at a table. And so search is transforming itself now as more machine capability becomes available, and these mathematical techniques are taught to the 17-year-olds who, like me, say, I can do it. And they internalize that stuff and they put the Legos together in a new way. That's how search will be transformed. Google is trying to do that. Other companies.
Right. Yeah, that actually reminds me to what Eric Schmidt once said, that first of all, Google doesn't see itself as a search engine company, but as artificial intelligence company. And that ultimately the goal, he said, was to know what you want, when you want it, before you even know you want it.
Well, I don't agree with them. I think that what we're doing is learning to look at data in layers. Just as your comments to me early on before we had the interview, I said that singularity was working like the growth of a child, that you have evolutionary steps that if you look at them closely, you cannot discern on a day-to-day basis. But if you look at that child every 6 months, you are able to see patterns that you cannot see when you're close. And Google, I think, is using math in a similar manner, because if you see those patterns, then you can have a signal that can inform you about the change or the growth of that child. Violence in the preschool. If it's discernible over a 12-month period, there may be techniques to ameliorate the discomfort that that child feels to cause the violence to surface. But if you look on a daily basis, you may miss those important signals. We have to do the same thing with mathematics in these large flows of data that are available. And that is what's exciting about search. It helps us find actionable information.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you another amoral kind of engineering or mathematical capability.
I want to be in my basement with my servers. I don't want to think morality.
Right. So I'm asking you a relative question here about, so first of all, the way I get it, indexing, search, and surveillance, whether for advertising like Google does or for law enforcement like all those other companies that we discussed does, are pretty much the same thing. Is that not the case?
Yeah, it's all math. You cannot make math legal or illegal or good or bad.
Yeah.
Once you apply mathematical techniques, they operate. the variables are humans, and you can't change how people react to what are in effect predictable, repeatable systems and procedures that obey certain basic laws, whether it's physics or whether it's how n cubes operate, or how you can manipulate a map and see a ground level view of the terrain at the same time you're looking at the top down from a satellite, this hybrid view of a map. It's just there, and then people think about it the way I did when I was 17. It's a Lego block, and you put these things together, and voila, you can index these crazy Latin sermons. I mean, it seems, I don't know, I've been doing the same thing for 50 years, and I'm not going to change. And
you love doing it, and you're fascinated with it.
I do, yeah. And, I would like to work more. I'd like to take projects. I get calls, but I have to, like I said, I'm best in the morning, but I'm old and I get very sluggish by the time it's noon. And I need to live with that limitation.
Mm-hmm.
But I envy people who are the way I was, standing there as a freshman with my big, thick glasses, needing a job, totally confused about the university. And here's a guy who wants somebody to help him do computer work. And I tore it off. And that was my college education. It wasn't the classes and listening about calculus or any of that. I didn't care. I was a good student, but I didn't care. What I cared about was making the machines and the software deliver these new, exciting things. And that is what's going to drive innovation, are the young people who take these challenges. Some will fail, some will succeed. And that, to me, is, what is keeping me going. I'm trying to recapture that spirit that I had when I was 17 years old.
I think this is actually a good point to bring our conversation to a stop today, despite the fact that I can keep you for another hour here. But let me ask you, Stephen, what's the best place or way for people to connect and or start following you and your work, perhaps?
Well, as I told you, I don't do Facebook. My dog does Facebook. I don't do Twitter. We have software that tweets. If people want to reach me directly, we have a Yahoo account, and it's listed in the blog. And people can just send me an email. And if they want to hire me, they just put the word money in the subject line, and I read every one of those. But I'm very easy to find. If you search me in Google, I turn up. You search the name of my books. The trick is that I don't travel anymore. If people want to talk to me, they have to come, to Kentucky, and I will meet them in an airport or in a hotel or something. No one comes into this computer center. This is still where we did TOSIG, and I have kept all of the security functions in place. So we meet outside of my computer area, because I've got a lot of cool things. I got a lot of neat things going.
Right. So we now today get a privileged access, if you will.
Yeah, you can see. These three monitors are the ones I am doing the current analysis of the companies, that are in the dark web book. I mean, I'm running the intercept technology and the malware technology from one of the companies I mentioned. And then in the back, I think you can see the screens flickering. Those screens are the constant spidering we're doing for my overflight service. And there are machines on the other side of the room that are doing other work. My wife just shakes her head and she said, "Where are the stamps? This place is a mess." And well, it's all computers and wires, so I have no idea where my stamps are.
Well, Stephen, it's been fascinating to have you on my show today. What, in your view, is the best way to wrap up this conversation? We covered a variety of topics and issues. How do we wrap it up? What's the kind of parting message, perhaps, that you'd like to send us with?
Well, be excited about solving problems. Don't be afraid to try and solve a problem that you don't think you can solve. So that's be curious, work, learn. The second thing is you can learn about these new areas, next generation information access, the dark web, companies like Palantir, by buying those reports. And you can get information on them when they come out. You can look at the blog. It's called Beyond Search, and it's at www.arnoldit.com/WordPress. And there are 15,000 stories on it now after 8 years. And we publish 7 days a week, anywhere from 2 to 5 stories every day. And that's a lot of writing after 8 years. And, I do a couple of videos a year and put them on YouTube where I talk about CyberOSINT and some of the companies. And you just search for me on YouTube. I'm easy to find. I mean, Google is all over my content, indexing me and paying attention, as are some other companies.
Very interesting. So, Stephen E. Arnold, thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk. I'm going back to my machines before I fall asleep.
Thank you. If you guys enjoyed this show, you can help me make it better in a couple of ways. You can go and write a review on iTunes, or you can simply make a donation.